Alright, we're going to talk about equations containing radicals. Alright, how do we identify these equations? Well, we identify first it has to have a radical. Second, the variable has to be under the radical. So it could be under the cube root, under the square root. It just your x or whatever your variable has to be under the radical. All right, how are we going to solve this? The first thing we're going to do is we want to isolate the radical. All right, once we get the radical by itself, then we're going to raise both sides to correct power. So what this means, if it was the square root, you would square both sides. If it was the cube root, you would want to cube both sides. After we raise both sides to the correct power, then you're just going to solve for x. For these problems, it's important you must check your answers. So very important. For these problems, you have to check your answers. Alright, let's look at a couple of examples. So the first one, we need to isolate the radical. So we're going to add 2 to both sides. Then we're going to cube both sides since it was the cube root. So I cube both sides. So I'm going to get x squared minus 1 equals 8. Now we're just going to solve for x. So I'm going to add 1 to both sides. And then take the square root. And remember, whenever you take the square root of both sides, you're going to have a plus and minus. So x is going to be plus or minus 3. Now what you're going to do is you're going to take this plus and minus 3 and plug it into the original equation. So for instance, if I say 3 minus 1 is 2, 3 squared, which is 9. 9 minus 1 is 8. The cube root of 8 is 2. Does 2 minus 2 equal 0? Yes, so that works. You do the same thing for negative 3. In this case, both answers are going to work. So we're going to get x equals plus or minus 3 for our answer. Alright, now for this example, we're going to subtract 1 first. So I'm going to say 2x minus 1 equals negative square root of 2 minus x. Now, since it's the square root, we're going to square both sides. And don't worry about this negative right here. It's going to be taken care of when we square both sides. So I square both sides. So let's first square the right side. So if I square a negative, it's going to become positive. The radical will cancel out. So I'm left with 2 minus x. Now with the left side, you have to FOIL that. So to FOIL it, you're going to get 4x squared minus 4x plus 1. So you have to FOIL that out. That's a common mistake that people make. Once we FOIL it, notice it's a quadratic equation because my degree is 2. So I'm going to move everything to one side. So I'm going to get x squared minus 3x minus 1 equals 0. Now you're just going to factor it like we have been doing. So if I factor using bridge, I'm going to get 4x squared. My two numbers are going to be negative 4 and positive 1x. Then I factor by grouping. So I take a 4x out, I get x minus 1. Take a positive 1 out, I get x minus 1. So I'm going to get 4x plus 1 times x minus 1 equals 0. So my final answer is going to be x equals negative 1/4 and x equals 1. Now remember, we have to check our answers. So if I take 1 and plug it in, Alright, I'm going to get 2 times 1 is 2, so 2 equals, then I plug it in here, 2 minus 1 is 1, 1 minus 1 is going to be 0, so 1 ends up not working, so 1 is not going to be an answer. Now if you take negative 1/4 and plug it in into the equation, it will work. So my final answer is x equals negative 1/4. We will go through a couple more of these problems in class, but that gives you a general idea of how to solve these equations that contain radicals.